Welcome everyone to another lesson brought to you by Zip Code Wilmington, code of school here in Wilmington. If you want to check out Zip Code Wilmington, make sure to check out zipcodewilmington.com. I'm Wilhelm Alcivar, and today I'm going to be teaching you about the JavaScript library ExpressJS. Now, ExpressJS is a JavaScript library that is used for making modern web apps. It is typically used for making server-side apps, although some people have used it for making front-end apps. Today, I'm going to be going over just making some nice back-end, kind of easy APIs to work with, and we're going to get started and talk a little bit just about what ExpressJS is and where you might want to use it. So over here, let's get started. I have up here a folder that I just am calling Express Lesson. So if you want to follow along, you can just create a workspace. This is a terminal here, and as you can see, there's nothing in here yet, but we're going to fill it up with some stuff now. So right now, I am running Node. The version of Node that I'm running here, ooh, that's not correct. Let's see. The version of Node that I'm going to be running is 11.13, 11.13, and NPM version 6.7. So if you want to have the same version as me, go ahead and switch to that version. Although it should technically work if you're on Node 10 or above. So first things first, we're going to have to install Express. Now, like I said, Express is a Node.js library. So the first thing we're going to have to do here is just say Npm Install Express -- save. Now, all this is going to do is it's going to create a Node modules folder for us where we're going to store our npm package, specifically Express here. And this -- save command is just going to say that this Express package is going to be necessary for our project to run. So I'm going to hit that. We're going to see some stuff happen here. We're also going to see in our sidebar a bunch of packages show up here. This is the Node modules. This is where I was saying we're going to get all of our dependencies. So Express actually has a lot, so we have 50 packages here. That seems like a lot, but in the Node.js world, that is mostly files and folders and packages that other libraries also use. We also now have this packagelock.json file. So what this file is doing here is it's basically just telling other people what's going to be in our project. So every other time we run npm install or something along those lines, everyone is going to get the same versions of everything that we are. So back over here, I now have everything installed, and I have no warnings and no vulnerabilities. So I can go ahead and get started here. What I'm going to need is to make a file. Now, typically when I'm creating a Node app, I like to just create a file called app.js. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to say touch app.js. What this is going to do is it's going to create an app.js file for me. Here I can actually start to write some JavaScript code. So I can say console.log, and I can put in some message. Hello, zip coders. And once I have that saved, I can then run that by simply running node app.js. And we'll get whatever we get from our program output. So back to app.js. We are actually creating our first Node.js app. So what we're going to have to do is actually import our package from Node.js. The way we import packages in Node.js is pretty simple. We use a statement called require, and we just put in the name of the package that we're importing. So I'm going to say require express, and that's going to give me access to the Express library. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to store that in a variable that I'm going to call constant express. From here, anytime I want to create an Express app, I'm just going to use this library. Next, I want to create an actual app variable where I can store my web app. So I'm going to go ahead and say const app equals express. Well, this is going to create a new Express app for me, and I'll be able to actually serve content using this. From here, the last thing I can do is define a port that I'm going to want to serve my website from, or my web app. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to say constant port equals 3000. 3000 is generally a good test port, and it's the one I prefer, although you can put in any port you'd like here. So from here, now we need to actually start up our app. So in order to do this, we actually get to use a simple method just called app.listen. We're going to pass in that port that we want to use. And then we're going to pass in here what is called a callback function. Those familiar to Java here will recognize this likely as a Lambda function. This is simply a function that we're going to use that's going to be passed in as an argument of this method. Inside of here, all we're going to do is put in some log information. We're going to say our app is listening on port 3000. Semicolon at the end. And now this is actually a fully functional Express app right here. We can actually go ahead and run this. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here to my terminal. And I am going to go to that project. So I'm going to go to project, and this is Express lesson. There it is. And then I'm just going to run node app.js. And I get some errors. I get that app.list is not a function. App.listen. That's what I'm looking for. There we go. So I do app.listen, and I get this message here that our app is listening on port 3000. That's exactly what I expected here, since this was the callback function that we put in here. Now, this app actually isn't really doing anything because we haven't programmed it to do anything quite yet. Now, what Express is actually going to allow us to do from here is it's going to allow us to set up what are called routes. And then from those routes, I'm going to be able to give responses. So Young Metro is asking already, why am I using the backtick compared to the single tick? So actually, I believe you're misinterpreting. This is actually just a font here. The backtick on my computer looks like this. So it's slightly different. I am using the single ticks here. I could also use the backticks, though, just to show you. In JavaScript, both of those equate to strings, so it wouldn't actually make a difference in my case here. But I am just going to go ahead and use the single tick. Just a personal preference. Usually when I have one word here, I'll use single tick, and when I have a whole sentence, I use double ticks. Again, just personal preference then. So, continuing on, like I said, so ExpressJS is going to be letting me create routes, and using those routes, I can create responses. So, let's go ahead and actually make our first route. In order to define a route, I actually get to put them onto the app class. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to say app, and then I'm going to make a GET request. So in order to make a GET request, I actually just use the GET method. And then all I do is I put in the route that I want to put on here. So I'm going to make the route /home. From there, I have to make a callback function here. So I can either use the function keyword, or I can actually just use a Lambda function the way I'm using before, a callback function. I'm going to use this because this is how modern JavaScript programmers tend to prefer coding in JavaScript. I personally don't have a preference, but we're going to keep to modern standards. The callback function is going to take two arguments. It's going to take the argument res and req. Got this backwards. It's going to take req and res. So the request object here, req, this object is going to contain information about the request that is being sent in, And the response object, res, this is going to be where we store information about the response and the object where we're ultimately going to send a response to our client. So this function here, home, all I really want it to do is send a message that says, we're in the home menu. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to say res.send, and then within that send function, I'm going to send a message. My message is just going to be something along the lines of, this is the home page. So I'm going to save that content there. And okay, yeah, that is saved now. And once I've saved that, I need to restart my application. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my terminal over here. I'll close this, and I'll rerun that node app.js. Once I run that, we're listening. And now my app can actually do something. It can actually respond to people who are going to this home page. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to move over to this tool here called Postman. Now, Postman is going to allow me to make requests to APIs, and since this is an API that I'm creating here, this is a good candidate. So my current app right now is running on localhost, or my local machine here. So I'm going to put in localhost, and then it's running on port 3000. That's the port that I've configured here, so I'm going to put in 3000 here. And then the route that I set up is /home. So if I've set this up right, and hopefully I did, then I should be getting the response, this is the home page. So let's see. I'm going to hit the send button. It'll load for a second, and there I have the message there. This is the home page. Let's see. Just copy this and paste it over here so y'all can see. It says, in fact, this is the home page. So great, I have a response now. So this is the basics of ExpressJS, is just creating and sending responses from these routes. But we're going to have to do more if we want a fully fledged API, really. So let's go through maybe some examples of a Crud API. In a Crud API, we typically have 5 different routes for some asset. Now, these assets can be anything, so for today, I'm actually just going to make the assets users. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say we have 5 routes that we want to make. We want to get all users. We want to create a new user. We want to show a particular user. Then we also want to be able to update that user. And lastly, we want to be able to delete a user. These are all of the functions that are required to make a Crud API, and they're oftentimes the elements that you'll see in all of these different REST applications. Now, one thing before I continue. ExpressJS doesn't actually have any way of interacting with a database or with files of any type. ExpressJS is really just this. It's really just creating endpoints and figuring out how to respond to those endpoints. So unfortunately for this demo, I'm not going to be able to connect this to a real database. However, there are a plethora of Node.js libraries, and some that I can recommend for connecting to a database, creating models, and making a more fully functional application. So let's get started. First of all, getting all users. The typical way that we're going to format a route that gets a particular resource is we are going to say app.get. This will create a GET request. And then we're going to say / and point to that resource. So I'm going to say users. This indicates that this is a route where I'm going to get all users. Then I'm going to have to create my callback function. So req, res. And then I'm just going to write a message here for now. I'm going to say response.send. This is the page showing all users. And again, I should be able to stop my app and restart it, if I go back to Postman and I send a post to users, I get a response that says this is the page showing all users. Pretty much the same as before, but now we actually want to also start getting some other stuff. So this is get all users, so I'll move this up. Now we want to be able to create a user. When we create users, or when we create any resource, typically in a Crud application, what we're going to do is we're actually going to make a post request. Now, just like the GET request, ExpressJS actually has a built-in function for doing this. So I can say app.post, and then I want the route where I'm going to post something. Again, I'm going to use users since I'm already using that up here. And then I make a callback function. Request, response. And then once I have this request response, I'm going to just say response.send. And for now, I'll just say, having a little trouble. For now, I'll just say, you created a user. And then I'll just put in to do save a user. So now I'm going to go ahead and restart my application. I'm going to go back to Postman. And in Postman, I'm going to do this GET request again. If I get a user in Postman, I'm going to get this response. This is the page showing all users. So how do I get this you created all users? Well, just like this function here says, I have to make a post request. So if I change my method to post, so I'm going to post to /users, I send this, I get the message you created a user. So now I can actually create post requests. Now, like I said before, ExpressJS doesn't actually have the ability to save files or anything to a database, so this is as far as this tutorial is going to go. But like I said before, there are a lot of different Node.js applications that do in fact connect to databases, and there's a lot of libraries that you can check out. For now, though, I'm going to focus strictly on what ExpressJS can do. How come I'm not using request? So currently, I actually don't really need to use request. Request is going to give me information about the request that's incoming, but I don't need any context in order to do any of that for now. So I'm going to go ahead and push this up. So already I'm starting to see that I have a bunch of methods here in this app file, and it's starting to get cluttered, and I have 3 more functions that I actually need to be able to do here. So at this point, when I start to see something like this, I have a simple application, it's already 30 lines, and I'm going to be adding a bunch more. It's probably a good idea to start cleaning some of this up before I continue. Typically what we can do with this is we can actually just use some good JavaScript conventions and pull some of these functions out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start by making a controller. I'm going to go back to my shell over here, and I'm going to create a new app, or create a new file here. This file is going to be called controller.js. Typically with a controller, you'll want to name it based on what it's controlling, but for now, I'm just going to keep it simple and call it controller. Now, in this controller, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a module that's going to export something. This is some good Node.js stuff here. So if I want to create a module, all I really need to do is say module.exports equals, and then create an object that's going to be exported when I import this file. So I can actually go ahead and create different keys that will point to these callback functions. So for getting all users, I'm going to call this the index function. So this is going to be index, and actually I can go ahead and just take this callback function here, this one right here, and I'm going to go ahead and just take that out and paste that right in there. So now I have my index method here, this callback function, inside of this controller module. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then we're going to go ahead and try and use this over here inside of our app.js. First thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to import this. Now, when we want to import something from our node modules folder, all we have to do is actually just put in the name. So up here we have require express, and that's actually loading ExpressJS from our node modules folder. If we want to load something that we've created here, however, we have to give a path. So I'm going to create a const controller. I'm going to set that equal to require. And then the path that's set here is /controller. This is going to load that controller file, this module, into that controller variable, and then I'll have access to this index method here. So for app.getUsers, I'm going to put in controller.index, and this index here is going to be a method reference that allows me to use that here. So if I restart my app, go ahead and do that now. Go back to Postman. Ooh. Screen was missing. Yeah, okay. I'll go ahead and repeat some of what I just said here. So let's remove this, and let's move back a step. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so what I did back here was I have my app.get users here. And this has this callback function that I want to move out to another file. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and create that controller file. Over here in my terminal, I'm going to do touch controller.js. So now I have this controller file here. Now in this controller file, I can do some good Node.js stuff here. I'm going to create module.exports. I'm going to set that equal to an object. Now this object will be what's exported when I try to import this from another file. So what I can do here is I can take this app.getUsers, and I can set this to a function in here. I'm going to call this index. In that index function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this callback function, I'm going to cut that out here, and I'm just going to paste it over here. Get some tabbing in there, and now I have an index function within this module. So what I can do now is I can import this. Now, again, as I was explaining before, when I want to import something from Node.js, all I have to do is put the name in here. When I want to import something that I've created, though, I need to give it a file path. So what I can do is I can put in const controller equals require, and then I'll put in controller, since that's the name of the file that I've created over here. So now, this controller object here is going to have access to all of the functions that I've put in here. So far, just index. So down here with this app.getUsers, I'm going to go ahead and put in controller.index. Then I'm going to go back over here to my terminal. I'm going to restart, and I have an error. Let's see. Cannot find controller. controller.js /controller. I set it and then I didn't type it. Go ahead and run that. It's now open. And so now I'll go to Postman. So now I actually want to be in Postman. And I'll get all users. And now I'm actually running this from my controller. So I was able to actually, here we go. So I was able to actually clean up this file a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the post function, and then we can move on to the rest of these. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to go to the controller, put a comma here, and then I'm going to say store. And that store function is going to be this one right here. From there, I can go back over to my app. I can say controller.store. And now I'm able to clean this up here. So I've been able to remove a bunch of lines here, and I'll be able to make all of this more clean down here. So next, I want to show a user. Show a user, I'm going to say app.get. Since a get request is what I'm expecting here, I am getting some content. And then I'm going to get users/ID. Now this ID here is actually not what I'm expecting. I don't want someone to type in user/ID in order to get a particular user. I want them to actually pass in the ID of the user that they're requesting. So I can't actually just put in this text here. Instead, I'm going to put in a flag here that will indicate to ExpressJS that this is a variable. In order to do that, all you have to do is just put a colon symbol right in front of that ID, and now Express.js is going to say, okay, well, people aren't going to statically type ID in there, they're going to type in some variable. In this case, it's going to be a number. So, what does that look like in my controller now? Well, let's go over here. I'm going to create another function here, and I'm going to call this function show. Just like before, it's going to have request and response, and it's going to be a callback. Now, inside of here, I can say, well, response.send, just like everything else. This is the function where we show a user. But it's not just any user, it's a particular user. It's the user with that ID. So how do we access that? We want to show not just a user, the user with ID, and then we're going to reference that ID here. We're going to reference that by using the request object. Now remember I said earlier, the request object is the object where we're storing information about the request. So that includes things like headers, query parameters, route parameters, URL parameters, and all this extra information that a user might be sending to us. In order to access the URL parameters, what request.js has given us is a special variable called params. So if I say request.params dot, and then I put in the route param that I'm actually looking for, so in this case ID, this will show me the ID that somebody put into that page. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I have app.get users ID. I have in my controller this show method, which is going to print out that ID. And then lastly here, I'm just going to use that controller.show in order to make that the handler function for this route. I have to go back here and restart my app.js file. And then I just go back to Postman. And I'm going to say that I want to get the user with ID, let's say 5. I hit send here, and now you can see over here, that I get, this is the function where we show the user with ID 5. Now, whatever ID I pass in there, that should show up there. So if I put in 3 over here and I run send, and I'll bring that back over here, I see that this is the function where we show the user with ID 3. Now again, I don't have this connected to a database, but in theory, this would be the part where I make a query and grab stuff from the database, so on and so forth. Alright, so now we have that, and we can kind of just continue to bang these out. Most of these examples are just about the same. So in order to make a put request, I'm going to do app.put, and the route is going to be to /users/ID again. I'll make a controller.update, and I'll do app.delete in order to do a delete request. And this is going to go to /users/id. This will go to controller.destroy. You all know me and my love of destroying stuff. Back in the controller, again, I'm going to make an update function. Request response response.send, updating user, and request.params.id. Destroy. And we have a functioning app. Now, the last thing we might want to do if we're creating an app, though, is we might want to put some validation on this. So, in order to do that, we would need to actually check something before we actually run any of these routes. In a typical application, we might use something like a password, and that password would be stored in a file or database, and it would be hashed and secure, and all of that's cool, but again, I'm going to keep this a little bit simple. We're going to put in an easy validation check in here using a piece of software that Express gives to you called middleware. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file over here. I'm going to create the file touch, and this file is going to be called middleware.js. Now in this middleware file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a validation function. And we're going to use that before we enter any of our functions within ExpressJS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a module, .exports, and I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to put this validate function in here. Now, inside of this validation function, we're actually going to have three variables here: request, response, and next. So next is actually a function that's going to be a callback function. This callback function is just going to be the next function in the series of functions that Express is going to call. Now, that might not make total sense right now, but let's just go ahead and ignore it, and we'll talk about it in just a second. So what I want to do is I want to validate this request somehow. And I'm going to say that if somebody wants to make a request to my API, they have to know the secret password. Now, I don't know what the secret password is, but if anyone would like to tell me a secret password, they can go ahead and tell me in the chat now. So I'm going to go ahead and say console.log, and then I'm going to say I am validating your request. Console.log, what is the secret password? The secret password, Krebel says, is smelly catfish. I like that secret password, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say that we have a var secret password, and that is going to be equal to smelly catfish. So now I need to see if the user has passed me this secret password. Well, just like before, I can see if the user has passed me something in this request object. The safest place for a user to send some information is always going to be in the headers. So I'm going to go ahead and say req.headers. This is the place where express.js will allow me to see headers that a user has passed in. Request.headers.password, and this is going to be the password that is the user password. Great. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the user password is equal to the secret password, then I know this user is validated. So once this user is validated, what do I want to do? Well, I want to do whatever they ask me to do. And whatever they ask me to do is actually going to be stored inside of this next callback function. So all I have to do is I just have to call next. That is going to go to the controller action that is ultimately called in the end. Now, if they haven't validated correctly, so if they've given me a password that was incorrect, then I'm going to have to go ahead and send them an error message. So I'm going to say response.send, you did not say the secret password. Krebel's asking what is the difference between equals equals and triple equals. So in JavaScript, double equals is what's considered truthy. And truthy essentially means that if I am comparing two objects that would both result in false, so if 0 will result in false for a check, and if empty string will also result in false for a check. Because those will both be false when they're passed into an if statement, you'll see that if you do 0 equals equals this empty string, then that will work. Now, that's great if we just care about if something is false E, as JavaScript developers put, or truth E, as they put. But in this case, we actually don't want to see if they'll both equate to true or both equate to false. We just actually want to see if they're the same value. And so in order to see if they're the same value, JavaScript gives us this triple equals notation. This is going to check that they're the same type and these objects have the same information inside of them. In this case, because we are comparing strings, they're going to check that both of these strings are smelly catfish. Hopefully that explains it well, but if not, we'll have to do a further JavaScript video explaining this. And we'll have to play my favorite game. Are those two things equal, or is JavaScript just weird? Alright, so explaining this code again, this validate function. All this is saying is if the user passed in a password that is equal to our secret password, then what we're going to do is we're going to fulfill their request by calling this next callback function. Else, so if they didn't put in the secret password, then we're going to send them a message that says that they didn't say the secret password. And because they didn't say the secret password, we don't want to actually fulfill their request. So now how do we use this in app.js? Well, it turns out it's actually pretty easy. So I'm going to just put in here app.use, and I'm going to pass in that function. So that function is found inside of the middleware.js. So I'm going to go ahead and say const middleware equals require. I use single ticks here, just as a matter of preference. Equals require middleware semicolon. And I'm just going to say use middleware dot validate. And so what this is going to indicate to express.js is just that we're going to use this middleware whenever we get to this point in the app. So if someone just goes to the home page, they should just be able to actually get that home response. But if they're not requesting the home page, so they're requesting anything with users, then we want to validate their request before saying that we're willing to do it. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go and restart this app. And we'll see if there's any errors real quick. No, it looks like I did everything correctly there. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to Postman. And I'm going to start doing some of these requests again. So if I go to the users, my caps lock got on at some point. If I go to users, before this was saying this is the page that will show all users. But now, because I have this validation, it's going to tell me I didn't say the secret password, so I'm not allowed to actually go here. I told my application, though, that if somebody put in the secret password into the headers, which I can supply here in Postman, then I would let them in. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to pass in a password key, and the value of that is going to be the password that we've decided earlier, which Krebel supplied, said it was smelly catfish. So I'll go ahead and do that. Smelly catfish. Enter there. And now when I send this request, I get the page that is showing all users. So now I actually have a piece of middleware that's going to validate that somebody is allowed to do all of this stuff. And I have a pretty fully functional ExpressJS application. The only thing that's missing is a real database. But again, that's a lesson for the future. So, going over everything I went over today, I created a Node.js module. In order to do that, I said npm install express -- save. And that installed ExpressJS in my current folder. Once I did that, I created an app.js file simply by saying touch.app.js. Within that app.js file, I imported Express, and then I created a new Express app by saying app equals Express. From there, I also decided to set this port to 3000, and once I put in app.listen, I passed in that configured port. Next, I created a bunch of routes. These routes allowed our users to send us messages and get the response that they were looking for. Finally, I created a piece of middleware here. This middleware sat between my user's requests and made sure that whoever was getting information from us knew the secret password. So if you wanted to continue this application, what we might be able to do is we might be able to hook up a database to this. If we put a database on this, we might actually be able to say, instead of there being a single secret password, we could actually say, do they know that their own password? So I could say, okay, well, if they request a user with this ID, then I'll grab the ID and I'll have the password saved in the database. From there, I'll see if they know that password for that particular user, and use that piece of middleware in order to fulfill the request. I can also create more pieces of middleware. This might say reject the request if the ID isn't an integer. It might whitelist certain IPs so that if a particular user who is trying to abuse the app was using my app, I could delete them and make sure that they weren't able to use it further. The last thing I could do is I could introduce the concept of models into this in order to make this an MVC application. Currently, we're using a controller in order to fulfill requests, but we don't really have models to model data after. And we don't really have views. Currently, we're just sending flat text here. If I wanted to create a view, possibly JSON or HTML, this might make my app a more well-rounded CRUD application that was really usable for the real world. But as it stands right now, in less than an hour, I was able to get all of my controllers set up, which I'd say is a pretty good starting point. If there's any questions, I am available to take them now. Otherwise, this has been a lesson with Zip Code Wilmington. As always, these lessons will be made available on GitHub, and the VOD will be uploaded to YouTube later on, so feel free to also request that. And if you have any requests for future lessons, also let me know. I'm going to go ahead and do this Git stuff. Currently, all I am doing is adding node modules to gitignore so that I can commit this stuff here. What is the name of the application you use for localhost access? So, are you talking about the application you're seeing? Let's see. Are you talking about the application that you are seeing? Let me go back over to this screen. In the bottom right there, if that's the one you're talking about, that's actually iTerm2. That is a terminal application that allows me to just navigate my computer. I'm also using ZSH, which is a plugin that you can get for iTerm. And actually, I believe you can just get that on your vanilla terminal as well. If that's not what you're talking about, let me know, though. The other thing you could maybe be talking about is if you're saying, like, what is starting up localhost and letting me listen. This line here, app.listen. This is express.js actually starting that server. Okay, yeah, great, no problem. I'm a big fan of iTerm2, and I'm a huge fan of ZSH. All right. Doesn't seem to be any other questions. So, again, this has been a lesson from Zipcode Wilmington. If you want to learn more about Zipcode Wilmington, you can check out zipcodewilmington.com. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at zipcodewilm. Go check us out on Facebook at Zipcode Wilmington and our Instagram at zipcodewilm. It's been a pleasure having you all here, and thank you so much for showing up. We're going to be doing these once a week. Again, let me know if you have any requests for future lessons, and I'll see you all next week. Goodbye.